Welcome to the Raakvat Rugby interview. Today I'm having a chat with Wihan van Riet. He had a session with 8-9 combo, Harry and Brett last week, and they had a lot to say about kicking, but you guys wanted some more, so we invited him back, and it's my pleasure to welcome him back on Megafoon Sport this morning. Hello, Wihan.
Hey, Mvia, thank you so much for having me.
All right, let's start with why we're chatting to you. And we're chatting to you because you know a lot about kicking. So what makes you a kicking guru? And you were very almost shy about saying that you're a kicking guru, but you are. Tell us about your background a bit, what you learned about kicking and what makes you such a kicking specialist.
Yeah, I'm a little bit shy about it because I'm really just plagiarizing everything I got taught by my coach. I learned from another person, Mike Hollis, a former NFL All-Pro kicker, 9 years with the Jacksonville Jaguars, absolute legend. And most of the stuff that I teach other boys are things that I've learned from him over the course of the last 10 years that we've been working together. And so I wouldn't call myself a guru. Perhaps you could say that I'm definitely a better coach than what I was a player. So maybe guru is the right word. I'll take it.
You know what they say about teachers, those who can play and those who can't teach. So there we go.
Yeah. Yeah.
Tell me, but you had a bit of a background in NFL, and that fascinates me. Niels Botha went overseas a couple of decades ago, and didn't quite make it. You went overseas, you followed the same route. Tell me about your history in the NFL.
Yeah, I mean, if you consider that Nas struggled, you could imagine how an average guy like me struggled. I started out as every young South African boy with the dream of playing for the Springboks, and just did not have it. Good average rugby player. I went to the Raakvat Rugby Academy. I really pursued it with everything that I had. Anything to stay away from sitting behind a desk. But rugby was really my passion. Or actually maybe secondary to kicking a ball. I really loved kicking a ball. Always have since I could remember. And at 26 or 25 or 26, when I realized this rugby thing wasn't going to work for me, I just simultaneously discovered that there was a sport that you could just kick. And when I found out about it, I pursued that for, with everything that I had. And you would think it's easy, but turns out it's harder than playing professional rugby, than to make an NFL team and be a professional kicker. It's very difficult. It's a very technical sport. There's very little margin for error, and there's very little forgiveness, from coaches and the public and so forth. So, luckily or unluckily, I was never in the position to be fired as a kicker. So, you could say I was kind of spared, but I had some really good experiences, and I learned a lot in the process, not just about kicking, about professional sports, but also about myself. And I started the journey as still a young boy, and I ended the journey as a man.
Tell me just briefly, what's the difference between the NFL kicking and rugby kicking? I'm not a big or avid follower of NFL, and I thought it was quite easy. You're right in front of the posts or whatever you want to call them in NFL. What's the difference? What makes it so difficult?
Yeah, there's numerous things that make it challenging. We could start with the ball. The ball it's a leather ball, and I know some of your listeners may have played with a leather ball 30 or 40 years ago. A little less forgiving to kick a leather ball. The second, you can build on that. The second thing is that you're kicking the ball off the ground. You're not able to kick off a tee. And I said this in some in the previous podcast. Kicking a ball off the ground will teach you things that kicking a ball off a tee never will. It's very difficult, and it's the same as comparing yourself at the driving range with your driver and hitting a flush ball with a 3-iron. Equally difficult in terms of the differences. And then of course you're wearing full kit, not the most comfortable thing to kick in, helmets and pads and all kinds of things. And then again, it's not just you kicking. It is you kicking, but you've got a whole operation. It's a whole team effort. You've got your line of scrimmage that's blocking, their guys that are trying to block your kick or put pressure on you. And you've got the snapper that snaps the ball. It's really just throwing the ball between his legs to a guy that catches it and places it for you. And that whole operation takes 1.2 seconds. So to some, it's an advantage not to have enough time to think about the kick too much, which I'm sure we'll talk about a little bit later. But the whole combination of this makes it very difficult. You have to kick the ball at a certain trajectory. The rotation on your ball. There's so many things that they look at when justifying paying a guy that kicks a ball $1 million a season. There's a lot a lot of technicalities that go into it. So it's not difficult to kick a rugby ball. It's also difficult. It's different. The basic idea of kicking a ball is what joins these two things. The mechanics involved and so forth. But it's two different sports, and it's two complete different mental processes to kick a football and to kick a rugby ball. I think what makes rugby difficult, and I don't know if everyone would agree with me, but I just think you've got too much time to think yourself out of the kick. When you're kicking a football, it's almost like a reflex. You don't really have much of an option. It just kind of happens, and your body either takes over and it does it, or it doesn't. And with rugby, you're kind of standing there, and when do you start? You need that cue and that trigger, and if it's not quite right, you're not in the kick, and a lot of times you can think yourself out of it. Of course, with rugby, you're kicking from different angles, from the touchline and so forth, and but we always say, and I mentioned this before, a good coach and a good kicker will tell you that any kick is just a straight line from point A to point B. Kicking from a touchline is just a smaller target. That's really all it is. So both of them are equally challenging, I would say. Kicking in the NFL and kicking in American football, I personally feel is just the whole involved process is more difficult. At least when you've got a rugby ball, you can put it on a tee, and most people can kick a ball off a tee. Just that basic principle of kicking the ball is a little more complex, a little more challenging in American football. That's not to say it's an easy feat to kick a last-minute penalty against New Zealand at Eden Park, right? Of course it's equally challenging.
You touched on quite a few things there: BMT, muscle memory, shot clocks and everything, but we'll talk about that a bit later. I wanted to talk about what you did next after you decided, listen, I'm not going to cut it in the NFL as a player, maybe. I want to do some coaching. You came back to South Africa, and what are you doing at the moment? What's your kicking academy about?
Yeah, so the first time I went over there, I initially went and joined an academy in San Diego. It was a guy called Michael Husted. It was also an ex-NFL kicker. He played for the Kansas City Chiefs also back in the day, and I just understood what they were doing there. Like all of a sudden, I saw what they were doing, and it was just like, this is what I'm going to do. If this whole thing doesn't work, if I'm not a millionaire by next year, this is what I'm going to do. And it was, an academy, a full-fledged kicking academy where guys would enroll and they would learn how to kick and they would get better and improve, and there was camaraderie amongst them. And the one thing that sort of tied everyone together was a similar methodology, and you could imagine that would happen if you're an ex-player and you would go somewhere, start an academy. The kids that come into your system, they learn what you teach, and then hopefully they can prove that it works at the highest level. The industry has changed quite a bit in the last couple of years, but yeah, for the most part, I saw that and came back to South Africa because, of course, who has the funding to just pursue the NFL forever? I had to make a living somehow, so I came back to South Africa and started the Rocketfoot Academy. And Rocketfoot is just a nickname, that came to be. I can't remember exactly where it came to be, but it just, throughout my life kicking balls, it just somewhere it stuck. So Rocketfoot Academy, I started that in Pretoria, another thing that I thought would be easy, but not as easy to work in the rugby industry. It takes a lot of drive and determination to make a living as a coach, especially a kicking coach. Not so easy. Very underappreciated, I would say. So.
All right. So the other thing that's quite challenging is the fact that you live in Limpopo, the northern province of South Africa, and one of the most beautiful places in South Africa. But it's far away from the rugby centers of the world, and you've actually started what's called a virtual academy. Tell me about that.
Yeah, so I realized quickly I had to dive very very much diversify what I'm doing in order to make this work. So yeah, I travel around and I do in-person coaching clinics and one-on-one sessions and so forth. And we have a scholarship program where I help South African boys that, just like me, didn't really have the potential to become a Springbok, but have some kicking talent. I help these boys get scholarships to go kick in college. And then, of course, I consult virtually. I consult college football kickers who want to learn this technique. And so over the years, I've built out a platform which helps these guys. So when they enroll into the program, they have access to tons of video lessons and drill footage of drills and stuff like that. And then once a week or two times a week, I consult them either over a phone call or a Zoom lesson. Or most of the time, I actually just review and analyze their film and send them instruction back. And this sort of goes back and forth. And sometimes these guys come to Africa and they come and train with me here and so on. Yeah. So yeah, there's quite a lot of things that entail making a living as a kicking coach.
Right. We're going to put all the contact details in the description below and on the screen here. So if you want to get in touch with Wihan, then you know where to get hold of him. More importantly, let's talk about kicking itself now. And I remember the old days when people used to make a little mound of soil, whatever, little pile. Some of them, like Andre Pretorius, used to make a little trail of soil there as well. What's changed in that sense? Why are we having these multi-story kicking tees lately? Why was that brought in, and what's the difference between the old way of kicking?
Yeah, I think there's a two-part answer here. I think firstly, it's just modernized. Just like everything else in rugby and other sports, has just become more and more modernized. So your equipment becomes more modern. I like the classic idea of building a sandcastle to kick from. I think it's quite vintage. But I think, and the second part of the answer is there's an opportunity to make some money, selling kicking tees, of course. Yeah. I think as a kicker, you want to be able to address the ball in the same way every single time. And I think a kicking tee, depending on your technique and so forth, but a kicking tee at least attempts to help you do that. I don't know how practical it is. I was never a kicker that used sand. Maybe Andre Pretorius can tell us how practical it is to carry around tons of sand to every game. I'm not sure. But I think it would be a lot simpler just to have a kicking tee, of course. Not as vintage, but I guess the difference between listening to old vinyl records and Spotify.
Well,
yeah.
Let's not go into that, because I like that little scratching sound and I like the little, the old style things. I'm just kidding. But the thing that's interesting to me about these tees, the fact that they're so high, and we'll get to that just now. One other question I want to ask you, this is going to sound really stupid. When I was small and I was kicking at posts very badly, I used to hit it with my toe, and I couldn't walk for a bit after that. And that's never the key. Why the kicking on the side of the foot? Where did that come from?
I don't actually know where it came from. I think I've read a story before that Gerald Bosch was the first to, propagate this style of kicking. But I know in the NFL and kickers that play American football back in the day, they also kicked this sort of what they would call a soccer style kick. But let's go back to the start. You talked about toe punting the ball. This is your first instinctive thing to do as a kid. If you take a 3-year-old boy and you put a ball down, you tell him to kick it, the very first thing he'll do is he'll line up behind the ball and he'll run straight at it and he'll toe punt it. And it's kind of interesting because ProForm mechanics is very similar to that. It teaches the kicker to swing the leg forward with the quad, which is exactly the same muscle group that you'll be using if you're toe punting the ball. So it is quite interesting that is your first instinct, and then you go through this. If you just let someone do what they think they should do, eventually they figure out this hurts my toes, and then they start creating an angle on the approach, and then before you know it, they're turning laterally in the swing because they think they have to do so. And ProForm brings you back to that. There's a realization and understanding that happens is that you can still swing that way if you understand exactly what relationship to create between you, the ball, and the target. And then you're still able to use that very quad dominant, hip flexor dominant swing, that same instinctive swing that you want to create as a 3-year-old boy behind a ball. You can still use that swing. All you have to do is understand exactly how these pieces come together.
Right, now we're getting down to the nitty-gritty. And you mentioned the word ProForm. And you know what it
Yeah,
means, but I have no idea what it means. Tell me what ProForm is.
yeah. It's ProForm is, in a nutshell, it's a kicking technique. But to elaborate on that, it really is a philosophy. It was initially created by a guy called Jim Gattano, who coached Mike Hollis, and then Mike became a pro kicker, and Mike taught me, and so on and so forth. So it's this multi-generational kicking methodology, and it's really interesting because there's a lot of significant connections within the ProForm method, and the natural things in the world. I don't want to talk too much about this because I often talk myself into in a circle, into a corner, because it's quite complex. But the kicking is all about causes and effects and relationships, and we understand how to program those relationships so it creates more of a harmonious balance between all the interconnecting movements in the system, because you want to be able to transition from, call it, you want your kicking process and your technique to feel as though it's one movement, just one smooth, swift movement. But it really isn't. It is a collection of movements that you put together, and you want the relationships that tie these connections, or that tie these relating movements to one another, to be as balanced as possible. And so we use the golden ratio and the golden angle and Fibonacci. The stuff that nature has provided us, the evidence is out there. I mean, your body is a living, breathing representation of the golden ratio. Your technique, if it's closer to that, it's just a lot smoother. Your body wants to move that way. It's just more natural. It just happens smoother, more free, and more effortless.
All right, we've wandered into mathematics now. So what on earth is the golden ratio? What does that mean?
Yeah, it's not my strong point, mathematics. Hello, Ms. Wenzel. Look at me now. But yeah, the golden ratio, to me, and look, this number has bothered the most brilliant minds for centuries. You're talking about guys like Da Vinci and and Michelangelo and those types of guys. So my brain is way too simple to give you the best answer here. But for me, the way I've experienced it through my research and so forth, the golden ratio really is like a source code that's embedded in all living things. If you look at a tree, how it grows, it doesn't just plot its way forward. It knows, for the lack of a better word, but it knows exactly how to move from a seed to a small tree to growing branches to eventually spreading their leaves out on branches in order for the leaves to get an equal distribution of sunlight. All of that is done by following this precise sequence. And if you look closely at that sequence, the relationships in that sequence is the golden ratio. And it's the same with your body as well. If you look at the length of your fingertips in comparison to your hand, in comparison to your forearm, and so on and so forth, those are also golden ratio relationships. And there's two ways to visualize the golden ratio. You can visualize it on a straight line, which is very similar to our approach. You could look at the approach as a straight line, and then you could look at your strides as the things that divide that straight line into these ratios, right? And then the second way to look at it is from the perspective of an angle, like a circle, for instance. So the golden angle is 137.5 degrees, and we try to find. Let me put it like this: if you do ProForm perfectly and you look at different intervals of the kick, you can find evidence of this golden angle and golden ratio in the technique everywhere. It is littered with it everywhere, from the angle of the foot striking the ball, from the angle of the body at contact, from a front view, from a side view. You can see the ratio divided in the strides, and you superimpose the tempo over that too. So it gets real complex, but it's best to bring it back to sort of a basic understanding.
All right, so let's look at a kick now. What are the variables? It's the stride, and then it's the swing, and then it's the contact. Am I right? What are the specific variables that you have to be good at in to be able to be a good kicker?
Yeah, that's a very good question, and it all depends on how athletic you need to be, determined by how many variables your technique. So there's many different ways to kick a ball, of course. I like to determine how many variables there are in the system based on how much lateral rotation is required for the kicker to actually get to the ball. Kickers do this because most kickers are right-footed, so when they line up, they take, say, 4 or 5 steps back from the ball. As soon as they take those lateral steps over, we spoke about it just now, when you're a child, your instinctive nature is to toe punt the ball right from behind it. Now you're creating an angle. What that angle does is, as you're lined up to the ball, your target, which is the goalpost, is to your left because of the angle, the relationship between you and the ball. Most kickers see this as a requirement to try to guide or steer the ball towards the target. But it's really not necessary at all. So that's, for me, where most of the variables come from. If I look at most modern kickers, they're approaching a ball, they think the target is to the left, and they start to rotate towards the target. And that rotation is where all the variables come in. That will determine how athletic you need to be to make the kick. For us, what we understand and what we teach our kickers is that you never have to change, at least voluntarily, you don't have to change direction ever. Because as soon as you land on your plant foot, there will be a deceleration in the left-hand side of your body as your right-hand side accelerates because you're swinging your leg, and that creates this rotation naturally. And so it's almost as simple as that. It's like you don't have to turn before you get to the ball. And just by adopting this mindset, of course, there's many things that go into it to make it work, but just by adopting this mindset, you're already eliminating 90% of your variables.
Okay, so let's look at the run-up. Now, there's famous instances of, like, Percy Montgomery, for example, who struggled with his kicking until he came back and then shortened his run-up considerably. Other guys literally, go back to the goal line and then start running towards the ball. And there's a lot of different strides here. You have a specific philosophy behind the run-up. Tell me about that.
Yeah, so again, I can't talk about anybody else's process, but it makes sense to me what Percy does or did back in the day, just simplifying things, just trying to eliminate more and more variables. I think Percy understood that the more movements there are, the more things you have to time up. And so I think and I'm just assuming here, but I don't know, he may differ from this opinion, but I think what he did was he sacrificed a little bit of distance on his kicks in order to be more consistent from a shorter range. And it makes sense because he's got a little bit of a lack of momentum in the approach because his approach is so much shorter. But then again, it's a lot easier to control, these movements, the mechanics to kick the ball. I like to, with ProForm, again, this sort of goes back to football, so there's a specific reason why the approach is this way, because it's the maximum amount of momentum that we can get into the system before the ball gets blocked. So it's as far as you can be, and still be able to make that kick within 1.2 seconds. And then that is it's divided into basically 2 steps, because we've got a jab step and then something we call a touch step, and then we've got plant and contact. So it's also a very simplified way to approach the ball, but each step has an exact purpose. So your jab step, we want to be pulling ourselves towards the ball and not pushing, because we want a tall and vertical body position coming into contact. And the more you push, the more your body weight is forward, the further and further away you are from that optimal body position that at least what we're teaching. So everything we're doing is really sort of aimed at this moment of impact, this particular time where all of the moving parts come together to kick the ball. And then we kind of reverse engineering that process. Like, how can we get into this position with less and less variables? So if we already run tall and vertical, meaning that we can't be pushing ourselves, we have to pull. So we're using our hamstrings to pull ourselves forward, kind of like clawing your way forward. That already brings your hips forward. It keeps your body nice and tall. And now we're seamlessly into that body position and we're able to kick the ball. So that's one of the ways in which we reduce some of the variables. There's a specific reason we do a touch step. We call it a touch step because you're off this foot very quickly. That's the second step in the process. You get off this foot very quickly because, again, if you're coming into that step and you linger on that foot, it becomes an anchor and your upper body just comes forward while that foot stays behind. This creates a very exaggerated backswing. You're landing with all this forward weight into the plant foot. That stops all of your momentum, and now you're kicking the ball with all leg, which is what you see this quite a lot in rugby. So again, we want to accomplish more of a touch step. You're off that foot very quickly, so you touch, plant, kick, because we want to kick the ball as quickly as possible in the plant foot. If you've run correctly and you've created this optimal body position, you're already landing in it. Then every split second that goes by with you in the plant foot is simply, your body position is simply just breaking down. One of two things will happen. Either you're trying to stay in this angle and your momentum has to stop, or you continue with your momentum and you're ahead of the ball. And neither of those things are ideal. So Mike always told me, like, my kicking foot almost has to like chase my plant foot, almost like to kind of almost imagine that you kick the ball before you've even planted. Of course, impossible, but that sort of idea. So and he always used this example. I love this example. He would always say, okay, this is a regular, normal people or other people's technique sounds like this, right? Plant foot landing and then kicking foot hitting the ball, right? So they're like this. Big backswing, takes long to kick the ball. So it's all leg. This is ProForm. So it's plant kick. It's as quickly as possible. So you're in that body position, optimally in that body position, and you're moving, so that all that momentum's coming with you. Most kicking coaches talk about momentum, but you can't have a big backswing and take full advantage of your momentum. It's counterintuitive. The two of those things don't work together.
Sure. All right. That's complicated. All right.
Yeah, sorry. It's impossible to. Yeah, it's impossible.
I'm trying to picture it now. The plant foot is the ball the foot you plant next to the ball before you kick.
Correct.
Now.
Yeah.
Is that
yes.
So when I picture this, let's look at Manie Libbok, for example. When he plants his foot, he lies over a lot to the left, and he's got his hands like this to balance himself, I suppose. Am I picturing it correctly?
Yes. And there's several things that's going on with Manie's technique. And there's a lot of easy fixes, which is the frustrating part when you watch somebody struggle and you have some answers for them. But Manie has a very lateral action in his hips. He likes to turn his hips to kick the ball. And although this feels powerful, there's so many variables in it, because your swing is going across the target. Your body's falling one way. In order to so if you think about a body running perfectly vertical and balanced, right? The only way, if you're running, say, just on the inside shade of the ball, you can kick that ball with a forward swing. But as soon as you turn your hips, your kicking foot starts to flare out and out and out. The more you turn your hips. So what we generally call this, if you hook a ball like really hard to the left, we call that outside panel. So you've turned your hips, your kicking foot has flared out towards that outside panel of the ball, and you're catching the outside panel, and that's making the ball hook. So what kickers that have a lot of lateral turn in the hips, what they tend to do, because as they turn the hips, the foot flares out, they start hooking the ball, they tend to subconsciously run further and further inside of the ball so they can afford more of this turn and more of this foot flaring out and still catch the back of the ball. The problem with this is there's only a certain amount of space that you can give up before you're running down a line where your plant foot can't plant and you can kick the ball. It's like you're just getting so wide that it's just impossible for your plant foot to plant there. So what then tends to happen is, as you've created this extra space between you and the ball so that you can afford to flare that kicking foot out as your hips turn, now you're running in this line where your plant foot can't plant. So that plant foot has to come into a location where it can plant. And the way in which you do that, again, subconsciously, is you lean your body off to the left. You tend to lean that body off to the left to bring the plant foot into the ball. And now your whole body is off balance. And although this accommodates that lateral swing and you can still make contact with the ball, it's not a balanced body position. So if you consider what a ProForm body position looks like at contact, I can stand in that position effortlessly for hours. It's not fighting against, like, I can just stand in that position for hours. If you take, for instance, Manie's moment of impact, and you ask him, like, how long can you stand and hold that position? I don't know if he can hold it without any momentum whatsoever. It's probably split seconds. It's just, everything is so off balance. It's just not an efficient position to be in. And it just comes back to perhaps the way that he processes that he should kick the ball this way. There's a combination of that and his tee being very high. He can't be balanced, because if he is, he's going right underneath the ball because the tee's too high. The approach angle, he's running out of space, then he's trying to get into space. Like, there's that element to it. Like, Manie, truly, I feel really sorry for him, because he truly has every bad habit I had, before I learned this stuff. Every bad habit I had, I see the same in Manie. He's got lateral swing, off balance body, narrow plant foot. His weight distribution is wrong. Like there's a lot going on there.
But you talked about the tee being too high. Is that a common thing? Are tees typically set at the same height, or do you get different heights for the tees?
Yeah, you get low cut, medium cut, high cut, and I think now you even get like even higher tees. The problem is, especially with kids, when you're a child, a young boy, you struggle to get trajectory on your kicks when you're place kicking. I remember when I was a boy, I would cut Coca-Cola bottles in half, to try to build the highest possible tee, because mentally it's that's the cheat. It's like you're already lifting the ball, so that's taking care of the trajectory, and to some degree that is true. But as I mentioned earlier, like kicking a ball from the ground, it will teach you to solve problems that the tee is solving for you. And when you learn how to solve those problems and you then apply it, there's a certain height of a tee that you can get away with and still be balanced. But if you've solved that problems with the ball being on the ground, that translates to kicking off a tee, so much smoother. So yeah, tees are too high. Some of the tees that I've seen, even in the rugby championship, that guys are using, it's just too high. The reason why you can't be balanced, if you're balanced, we have to look at what the implications of a balanced body position at contact does. So to be balanced, your plant foot has to land further away from the ball. So the more that the nearer to the ball the plant foot lands, the more your body will lean off to the left. So we're on the same page there, right? So if we widen out the plant foot, then we become more balanced. So if you were to imagine a spirit level across your shoulders and across your hips, we want those spirit levels to be parallel to one another and completely balanced. So that plant foot has to land wide. Once that plant foot lands wide and your body's not leaning off to the left, because what happens when the body leans off to the left? What happens to your right hip? Your right hip comes up, and so does your right leg, and then eventually your kicking foot. So if your tee is this high and the ball's up here, then you need to be here because you need that kicking foot higher up to make contact with the ball. Now, if you're balanced, what will happen? Your right hip is down, everything is parallel to one another, and the kicking foot's swinging much lower. So if you're in a balanced body position, kicking with a high tee like that, you'll go right underneath the ball. You will kick the tee. There's one way that you can mitigate that is by landing with your plant foot way shallower, but I would not advise that, because as your plant foot shallows out, your kicking foot goes through that low point and is into an upswing, and then you can still hit the ball, but you're not quite in the best body position because you're sort of reaching for the ball. So I think that kicking tees that are too high are really damaging. It's really damaging to kicking techniques overall. I think kickers, if you're a dad out there and you've got a son, as frustrating as it's going to be for him, and even though he's not going to do this in games, but he should start off by kicking the ball from the ground, or at the very least a 1-inch tee.
All right. So now you've on your Twitter feed, you've mentioned that the ball is the target, not the posts. So that brings up the question now, where you mentioned the outside panel, for example, where are you supposed to hit the ball when you're kicking? And what angle should that ball be? We saw some of these balls on that tee lying forward, some of them being upright. What is the correct angle of the ball, and where should you hit it?
Yeah, I mean, if you're too obsessed about how you place and position the ball, then you're already thinking about the wrong stuff. Like, your mechanics should meet the ball, and irrespective of how it's placed, forward and upright or whatever, it should still make for a good ball flight. So I think a lot of these sort of forward weighted, wrong body angle kind of techniques that limit the swing and limit the upswing ability of the kicking leg, to a certain degree, guys are trying to make up for that, and maybe it feels better to them to have the ball sort of leaning forward or whatever the case may be. But I can only speak about what ProForm wants, and ProForm wants to kick. We always say this is the way that we would describe it. We want to kick the whole ball with the whole foot, or actually the whole ball with the whole body. And the predominant contact is on the inside panel of the ball, the panel that's facing you when you're approaching the ball. That's the panel that you want to hit. And you want to imagine the energy of your swing leaving the opposite panel. And so if you think about what that looks like, if you have a ball and your target is of course to your left, if you turn towards your target, you're always hitting at the base, you're hitting the back of the ball or the outside panel. We want to do the opposite. We want to hit the inside panel of the ball, which seems kind of crazy because it's not in the direction of where your target is. Your target's there, the inside panel's there. But what happens is that the more you can, how can I put this? The more you prioritize the ball being the target and that inside panel being the goal, and that's where you're swinging, the later your rotation happens. And the later your rotation happens, the straighter you're gonna kick that ball, because the rotation's always gonna happen. There's no getting out of that. You're gonna land on a plant foot that is gonna decelerate the left hand side of the body. The right hand side is going to continue to accelerate, and that is going to cause a rotation. That is a non-negotiable. It's always going to happen. But everything we're doing in ProForm is degree extend or delay that rotation from happening. We want to delay that rotation as long as possible, because that's your best opportunity to get most or all of the potential into the ball. The more you turn towards the target, the less you're kicking the ball. The more you're guiding and steering it. You're not kicking it, you're guiding it. We want to kick the ball. That's the point, right? The ball's the target. That's what we're kicking. We're kicking the ball. And that direction of the kick, the ball's always going to go somewhere if you kick it. So the question is, you just need to, with ProForm we figured it out, but essentially if you make the ball the target, you're going to kick it, it's going to go somewhere. You'll be able to figure out how to make that somewhere towards the target, but by keeping the ball as the priority target. I hope that makes sense. It sounds crazy, but
no, it does.
Yeah.
I want to ask another stupid question. Yeah, and just explain to me what a panel is. What do you talk? Is it part of this where the seam goes, or what is it?
Yes.
What are the panels?
Yeah, so the ball's got 4 panels. Most rugby balls and footballs have 4 panels, and it's just how the ball's made up. So you've got 4 identical panels that are all stitched together, right? And so when I'm talking about the inside panel, I'm talking about the panel that you can see when you're starting your approach. You're looking at the ball, you can see only one of those panels. That's the inside panel facing you. You can't see the outside panel, and you can't see the 2 front panels. But you should be, as a ProForm kicker, your focus should be on swinging and kicking the inside panel of the ball. The more you can focus on that, the more delayed your rotation is, the straighter you're going to kick the ball. It's mind-blowing, and it sounds crazy, but it works. It really works. Really works.
Right. Now, the next question, I'm going to take a step back here. And there's a saying in, when you raise a child, which you and I have both done, is nature versus nurture. And the question I'm asking is, how much of kicking is a talent that you're born with, like a golf swing? I'll never be a Tiger Woods, no matter how much I practice.
Yeah.
How much of a kicker's talent is born with, and how much can he learn? And what's the balance between the two?
Yo, that's a very, very difficult question. It's hard to say. I think naturally guys that are good at things like juggling, that can pass both ways, that just natural ball skills. Of course, if you teach them how to kick, or maybe they've got a natural feel for kick, for kicking, and then you get guys that maybe like myself that aren't as naturally gifted. I'm not a naturally gifted athlete. That's why ProForm works so well for me. I'm a very average athlete. I was not the fastest. I couldn't pass both ways, so I'm that guy that you're sort of referring to. It can be taught. That's the thing. ProForm works for me. I can kick a ball 60 meters. I'm 36 years old. It shouldn't be possible for me, but it is. But it's only possible for me because my technique is so good. So it is learnable, because especially I can again only talk about ProForm, but every single thing in ProForm is measurable. It's all predictive. And it's like a blueprint. You can follow each step, and you can get infinitely good at each compartment of the technique. And you can see where your weak points are, because you've got something. I mentioned it earlier. We've got the golden ratio to measure it against. So you can go and look, you can film yourself from certain angles, and you can kind of actually exactly see where you're short, where you're overshooting, are you turning before you get to the ball, etc. There's a million ways to to break down your ability to kick with the ProForm technique. But if you take a guy with natural ability, like just a natural baller, a guy like Manie, for instance, and you teach him this technique, the sky's the limit. And if everyone starts learning this, it's going to be a question, of course, of like who's the best at ProForm. ProForm kicking is the Tiger Woods swing of kicking. It sounds crazy, but again, I'm a super average guy. Like I'm not a great athlete. I can't pass both ways. You can ask any of my coaches. Very frustrating, But if I could get good at this and I can perform at the level that I can perform, I mean, I signed 2 contracts in the Canadian Football League. I couldn't even play provincial rugby. You know, I it's 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 all down to technique. Mike Hollis will tell you himself. He's 5'6" on a wet day, and 160 pounds, and he kicked in the NFL for 10 years. Mike is super average. He comes up to my shoulder. He's a small guy, and he kept his job as a professional kicker in the NFL for a decade, with many people breathing down his neck. So yeah, ProForm. That's the only answer I have. ProForm is the truth.
All right. Now we can learn how to kick. We can practice till the sun comes up, one day after the other, and do as much as we can. But another very determining factor, which may be a little bit more esoteric almost, is BMT, or big match temperament. And I wanted to talk to you about Manie, for example, or Jordan Hendrickson for that matter. We remember when he made his Springbok debut against Wales, he struggled kicking. And I think it was to do with the occasion. But in the Currie Cup final, for example, in very bad conditions, under immense pressure, he managed to put that last kick over and win the Currie Cup title. What role does BMT play in the ability of a kicker? How much does that inhibit your swing, for example, and your approach and your plant foot and whatever else? Well, how much of a role does BMT play?
No, I think these guys are tremendous. I don't think any one of them has that problem. I don't think they'd be playing at the level that they're playing at if they struggle in big moments. If you're in that position, you play at that level, those are the moments that you live for. These guys they're probably getting excited when they get the opportunity to win the game. Of course, you can feel a little bit of pressure here and there, but I just think that they've been at this for such a long time, and they've naturally transitioned between level and level and level. That should not be the problem. I think it comes down to technique. And look, everybody misses. Even if you're the perfect ProForm kicker, you'll still miss a kick here and there. It's in those big moments, you want something that is simple and repeatable, and with less and less variables. And that's what it comes down to. I don't think Jordan Hendrickson, for example, he got that kick and then he was nervous, and that's what the nerves made him miss the kick. I just think that there's things that he does in his process that he can simplify. You can have less variables and just less of a chance of missing the kick. I think that's what it comes down to. And I think Manie's the greatest example of that. That guy does not feel pressure. You can't tell me that Manie Libbok feels any pressure whatsoever. He no-look kicks, cross kicks. He plays in World Cup games. He shrugs off, critique from the public like it's nothing, like water off a duck's back. This guy he doesn't have a pressure problem. It maybe becomes a pressure problem when you've been struggling with your technique for a long time, and it's the talking point. Everyone's talking about it. Maybe it creates a situation where you sort of unnaturally feel pressure. But I don't think it's a pressure issue. I think it's a technique thing. I think it's a mechanics thing, and I think it really is just a question of overhauling his technique and his process. Whether that's going to be in the direction that I would like to see it, or some other way, I'm not too sure where it's going to go. But that's the answer. He doesn't have to go see a psychologist or some medium or psychic or something like that. He's got the head. He already has that. If I was in his position, I missed important kicks like that, I would just at some point have said, "No, guys, please, I don't want to kick." But he's always up for it. So it's simple. For him, it's simply just getting a process that's going to make this whole thing easier for him. So yeah, I hope that answers your question.
It does. I'm just thinking to myself, for example, the shot clock. He takes too long. He rushes himself, and that's part of goes back to technique. I was watching the Bulls the other day. You and I are both Bulls supporters. Let's put that out there. Boeta Chamberlain just seemed to have so much time. He was physically waiting for the clock because he was ready to do the thing, and just walked up and kicked the ball, and it was over. Manie waits until the very last second, and everything is rushed, and it comes back to technique again. I understand what you're saying. Somebody said to me once, Manie's got the memory of a goldfish in terms of pressure. He doesn't remember the pressure of the previous kick, but it's down to technique. If he sort out his technique, the rest will follow.
Yeah, and I think when you look at, you use Boeta Chamberlain as an example, you just get those types of guys that are they've got a more natural feel for kicking. I think the shot clock's a great idea. I think the less time you have to think, in my opinion, for me, the less time I have to think about the process, the better. I want my body to just kind of take over and do it. And that's what I was kind of talking about at the early stages of the podcast. If you have too much time, you just have this. There's always the opportunity to think yourself out of the kick. Like, when do you go? I want it to be almost more like a reflex, because my body knows how to do this. The only thing that is wondering about this process, like, can I still do this? That's my subconscious mind. Like, I want to keep those things as far away from each other as possible. So, again, if you have a technique or a process that involves, really being athletic, and there's a lot of moving parts and stuff like that, I think it's possibly more difficult to get into that groove. You're thinking about everything, like all of the feelings that's going to happen, and you're trying to anticipate that and stuff. So I can't speak on exactly why he takes so long in that position, but I think I don't know. I'm not too sure why he doesn't just line up and go. I can't tell you, but I would tell you this: if you learn ProForm kicking, the best feeling in the world is just putting the ball down, taking 4 steps back, taking 2 steps over, finding your plant foot line, finding your kicking foot line, and then just letting it happen. You don't have to stand there for a minute, 2 minutes. Look at, where the posts are, because this is another thing. Like, you've lined up relative to where the goalposts are. Then you stand at the back and you're looking at the goalpost, looking at the ball, looking at the goalpost, looking at the ball. That is a sign of somebody that's attempting to steer and guide this ball towards the target, which sounds like it's what you should be doing. But that, again, is not what a great golfer does. Tiger Woods does not steer the ball. Tiger Woods hits the ball as though it's the target, and his swing makes the ball go into a direction. And whatever that direction is calibrated through the way in which he is lined up in relation to the ball. He calibrates that direction through his stance, how wide his feet are, his body position at impact, and so forth. He does not think in the swing as he's coming towards the ball, where's the target? Let me try to guide and steer it there. So guys that are standing behind the ball or in their starting position in the approach, and they're looking at the ball and they're looking at the target, they're looking at the ball, they're looking at the target, they're just trying to figure out, how am I going to get this ball there? And the only thing that's happening inside here is I have to turn to get the ball to go there. And once you start adding voluntary preemptive rotation before you get to the ball, you start creating all of these bad habits. Those bad habits happen because the kicking foot flares out as you rotate your hips, and we covered this earlier. Then you have to run further inside of the ball in order to accommodate that flaring out of the kicking foot. Then you can never be in a balanced body position, and it's just, the things just kind of build on top of each other. And so the only way to do this without those variables, without a lateral rotation in your swing, is by prioritizing the ball as the target, running down your ProForm lines. We won't discuss where that is just yet, but down your ProForm lines and swinging forward at the ball as though it's at the inside panel of the ball as though it's target, and allowing your rotation to happen.
Okay, I'm going to ask you a bit of a question that I'm going to ask you to speculate about. Manie in the World Cup, for example, he yanked off the field after 30 minutes against England in the semi-final. Basically costing us a couple of games in the recent past. We lost against Argentina because he missed the kick. And I'm wondering, exactly like you said, if it's not a question of BMT, it's a question of technique, which we've now established. Why does the Springboks not have a kicking coach? That doesn't make sense. I've got a scrum coach and a line-out coach and a this coach and a that coach and everything, but not a kicking coach for the player that most obviously needs it. I know it's speculation, but why would you say that is? Do they think, listen, you're a Springbok, you should know how to kick by now? Or what do you think's wrong there?
Yeah, again, I think it's a 3 or 4 part answer. I think, yeah, you're a Springbok, you kick at domestic level, you're relatively successful there. If we get a kicking coach and he's got a different method than what you have, that's going to make you worse, right? So there's all that conflict of interest. Some of the domestic teams have kicking coaches on staff. So, again, it's just if this guy's process is different from, let's say, the national kicking coach, hypothetically, I know I would pull my hair out of my head if I'm working at the Bulls, for instance, and I teach, just for argument's sake, Boeta Chamberlain, and he's using my ProForm technique, and he gets to national level, and then there's, Louis Kuhn, for instance, undoing everything that I've just done because, of course, he has his way. So that would drive me insane. So I think it's that conflict of interest. The only way it would work is if you have almost like a director of kicking, sort of like what Rusty is with as director of rugby. You have like a director of kicking, and this is sort of, it has to be, they have to choose the correct technique, and then it has to be sort of filtered down through the unions, and then to high school level and to primary school level and so forth. That's the right way to do it. Otherwise, you're always going to see these sort of hit and misses. Then once in a generation, you get a guy like Pollard, who's a great fly-off and a great kicker, right? Mornay, great fly-off, great kicker. You want that to be irrespective of his current ability, or his natural inclination to kick. You want him to be able to become a world-class kicker. A guy like Manie, who's an exceptional fly-off, if he can learn, a technique that's going to make him a world-class kicker, why wouldn't you want that? So you're kind of leaving it for chance. That's sort of what it comes down to. And I think a lot of these things that a lot of guys are teaching. I see this on social media all the time. It drives me nuts. They're just sort of recycling and regurgitating things other people have said. No one's ever stopped and thought, like, does this actually make sense? Like, does it actually make sense to have your body over the ball? Does it actually make sense to have your plant foot right next to the ball? Does it actually make sense to have a big backswing, but then also talk about momentum simultaneously? Like, I don't think anyone's ever stopped. They've learned this from somebody else, and then they've recycled it and maybe put some of their own touches on it and thrown it back out there, and it just keeps evolving. And now we've got 3-meter high kicking tees and guys whose body position look like they've been in a car accident. Like so I don't know where it stops, but I'm trying to fight the fight from the mountains in Limpopo. Yeah.
No, I hear what you're saying, and I understand Manie had his own coach at Province, for example, and now you want to teach him something else. That makes a lot of sense to me, and I like the idea of, you said, sort of standardizing the kicking technique and then teaching it across all levels. That makes a lot of sense to me. But on that subject, I wanted to ask you. Coincidentally, today was the day I think we won the 2007 World Cup, and Frans Steyn made that immense kick. What's the difference? How can some guys kick that far, and some guys are more limited in their distance, but I suppose more accurate? Why can Frans Steyn and Andre Pollard, for that matter, kick so far? What's different in their technique, just as a matter of interest?
I mean, it's real basic to understand this. Lateral action versus forward quad dominated swing, and both Frans Steyn and Andre Pollard have a quad dominant hip flexor initiated forward swing. There is still some rotation, so there's areas where they can, which is mind blowing. They can be even better if they understood the full or the grasp. If they grasped the whole concept, they can be even better at this. And I'm not saying that because I think I'm the greatest kicker ever. Is simply the stuff that I've learned. So forward quad dominated swing, the same way that you would toe punt a ball, obviously from an angle, but versus lateral action. If you think about guys who are limited in terms of distance, and you go watch their actions, a guy that comes to mind is like Alton Jantjies, was never known. Go look at his approach angle, look at his action, lateral. It's not a forward quad dominated swing. So it really comes down to that. And then when you have these two camps, you can then start looking a little closer at the camp itself. Like in that sort of category of kickers that swing forward with the quad, what are their body position like? How balanced are they? How much of the groin is involved? Are they truly swinging forward, or is there still a bit of a turn coming or going on? So that's really what it comes down to. Frans Steyn, Andre Pollard, possibly the closest to what we teach, like what ProForm is. Like Frans Steyn especially, closest to what ProForm is, kind of ironically.
I wanted to ask you about other kicking, apart from place kicking. I'm not sure if you can talk about that, but
yeah.
Distance kicks. You mentioned Manie, for example, out of hand kicks, kick passes, kicking for the touchline, for example. How does that work? How does that differ? Because that I call torpedo kicks and the likes. What's the difference in approach there? Where do you hit the ball there? How do you hold it? Things like that.
Yeah, it's very interesting because ProForm teaches you that kicking a ball off the ground and kicking a ball out of hand, punting it with your quad and a forward swing, there's no difference. The only difference is that your contact position is slightly later in the swing path. Of course, when you're kicking a ball off the ground, you're making contact with it here. When you're kicking a ball out of your hand, you're making contact with it somewhere up here. So later in the swing path. The real difference is that when you're kicking a ball out of hand, you have the ball in your hand, right? Of course, that's obvious. But what the implication of that is that you decide where the ball is going to be placed and your body kind of follows. Kicking a ball off the ground or off a tee, you have that exact same opportunity, except you don't have the ball in your hands. It's already in a stationary position. The responsibility of placing this ball in the swing path comes down to where you're running and what, of course, what your intention is in the swing and so forth. So this is the greatest benefit of ProForm, is that you're not using a different technique to kick the ball off the ground or off a tee than what you're using when you're kicking to a touchline or when you're making a clearance kick. It's predicated on the exact same mechanics, exact same body position, etc. Of course, kicking a ball out of hand, it's a little more dynamic. Oftentimes, you're not in the position to execute a perfect technique because you're under pressure. Someone's trying to, charge down the ball or whatever the case may be. Maybe you're running sideways or whatever the case may be. But again, then you have the ball in your hand and you can place it relative to you where you can swing at it with a forward quad dominated swing. The box kick's a little bit different. You're in a completely different position, and sometimes you do swing laterally to kick the ball because you're under pressure, or you're on the receiving end of a tackle or something like that. But for the most part, the techniques shouldn't differ, and that's the thing. Like ProForm or Jim Gaetano figured this out 40 years ago, 50 years ago. But it is what it is. Yeah, it's hard to not refer everything back to ProForm.
Yeah,
So
the
I
principles
apologize.
apply. I didn't realize that. It actually makes a lot of sense to me. Wanted to ask you one more thing. The king of drop goals, Naas Botha, and we've seen drop goals win major tournaments and matches in the past. A drop
Yes.
goal is a different animal because you have to actually physically hit the ground. You have to have everything. You've got all the pressure, players running down on you. Talk to me about that a bit.
Yeah, again, one of those very dynamic situations. It can be different every single time, but your best chance to be successful at that is to try to make contact with the ball in the same way, that gave you your last successful kick. So you're trying to replicate something in this very dynamic situation where you've got to charge down, you're not in exactly the same position, you maybe have your weight slightly forward, you have the ball slightly left or right or whatever the case may be. But the art of the drop goal is to take that situation and then kind of switch it off and then enter into this process where your movements and mechanics become the same. You have this process where you go into, you'll see it often, guys have this they sort of set into this gear where they catch the ball, it's time for a drop kick, and then they fall into this rhythm. You kind of almost see it in their body language. So yeah, it's a totally different animal. It's very challenging, but your best chance for success is to have a process that you can replicate, or at least come close to replicating every single time. It's the same with everything else you're doing, right? When you're passing a ball, you're not passing it differently every single time. You're using the exact same movements every single time. When you're kicking a ball out of hand, bar the moments where if you have total freedom and you decide to kick the ball out of hand, you're gonna enter this process where your movements are replicatable, so to speak. And it should be the exact same thing with goal kicking. Of course, more important, goal kicking. The moments are much bigger. It's the kick is so much more valuable. So our school of thought is just, we try to simplify things, make it much easier to manage the little variables that are left. And this it's an easy thing to learn. If once you click and you understand this, you're like, how did I not think about this my whole entire life kicking a ball? So yeah.
So how much of all of the success is down to muscle memory, practicing?
Definitely. It's really important. Like I said earlier, like when I've lined up for a kick, and most of the guys that I work with, and Mike himself with his 10 years in the NFL, you just want your body to do it. You don't want your mind involved in this thing too much. Your mind sees things and sometimes it lies to you. It tells you you're going to miss this kick, whatever. You want your mind out of the process as much as possible, and you want the reflex to kind of take over. But what's taking over if you don't practice? You have to ingrain these things so that it becomes this natural process, So there's hours and hours that go into that, but you can speed up the process dramatically through smartly designed drills, very specific movement, specific focus drills that we do quite a lot of. And because you can, for instance, you can do 5,000 no-step drill kicks in a day, where you could probably only, like, before your whole body burns out, you could probably only kick like 200 balls. Like, then that's kind of pushing it. I would not recommend kicking any more than 30 or 35 balls a day, but just in comparison. So you can do like thousands of no-step kicking drills, which will teach you the body position, the swing path, and your contact, your foot position, and so forth. And then that sort of predicates into the next drill, and so on and so forth. And then eventually you've got your full approach. So if you do a lot of this drill work and stuff, you can teach yourself. It doesn't have to take, like they say, 10,000 hours to make it a habit. It could be a season, and we see it, especially with younger kickers that I work with. We see it all the time, especially with the younger guys, 10 years old, 10, 11, 12, perfect. Their brains are like little sponges that you could just literally, you can almost program them like software, and it's way easier, of course, but it's not impossible as an older athlete. I think the more difficult part of it is, if you're trying to learn this, you have to break down some of that. You're replacing the one with the other, so to speak. So there is a bit of a conflict there, but it's definitely not impossible. We've done it plenty of times before.
All right, Wihan, just getting back to the academy side of things. It's a virtual academy, so you do a lot of your training on Google Classroom, for example. Tell us how that works.
Yeah, so at the start, I did in-person Zoom lessons, and I worked, majority of the time I worked with American kickers, college kickers in the States, and it was always very difficult for us to find the perfect time. It's either 12 at night for me, or 5 in the morning for them, whatever the case may be. I made this work for quite a while. But over time, I realized I was saying the same things over and over again as I'm teaching. You would think it would be diverse, but most people really have the same problems if it kind of comes back to ProForm. And so I started recording. Initially I started recording some of these lessons, and I would share some of the lessons with other guys. Maybe watching me teach this guy is going to address the exact same problems that you have. And then eventually I just took the time to film myself from different angles to showcase different parts of the technique. And I recorded these lessons, from the basic aspects of ProForm all the way to the most advanced concepts and all the drills and so forth. And then I use Google Classroom, just like an app. I'll actually show you, if I can share my screen here. You'll see what it looks like. So this is my Google Classroom. If you go in here, you'll see there's kicking technique, masterclass, kickoff technique, masterclass, punting, advanced concepts, conditionings, flexibility, rugby goal kicking, and so forth. If you go into a classroom, you'll see that there's different lessons, like lesson 1, lesson 2, setup, approach lines, and each one of these things has theory in it, and it's got video lessons that I've recorded as well, with video examples, me talking over film, breaking it down, drawing on the film, and so forth. So it's a really valuable resource. I would have really benefited from having this if I was being coached in person, to have something to refer back to. If I'm not sure about something, I've probably watched Mike Hollis's ProForm YouTube videos. I'm probably 10,000 views on those videos, just to see what he's doing and try to figure it out, and trying to put my technique together. So this is a really valuable resource. I've been doing this for the best part of 6 years. I've been coaching this way. There's a lot of interest, and there's a lot of interest in this particular technique in the States, from college guys, or at least guys that want to go to college, even guys that are playing in college. And I'm really hoping to replicate the success of it in South Africa. I think there's obviously a need for it, but I think we've got a lot of potential here, not just for boys that maybe aren't going to become Springboks, and we can help them get scholarships to kick overseas. I don't want that to be a conflict of interest with SA Rugby or the rugby unions or whatever. But there's still a lot of potential to help local kickers here and help them develop really good technique. And then you'll never end up in a situation with a guy like Manie that's struggling, but he's clearly the best 10 that we have.
Wihan, just one more thing. You're showing videos to your pupils that you're teaching, but what about feedback? If they want to, how can you see whether they're doing the right thing? Do they send you videos, or how does that work?
Yeah, so that's exactly how it works. So they would watch these instructional videos that I filmed, and then they would go and practice. And in the lessons I describe, if you're sending me film, these are the angles that I want to look at, and so forth. And they would go train, film themselves. They will send me the film, and then I'll do a full film breakdown and analysis on the film. And I do this at least once a week with each kicker that I'm working with. So it becomes quite, yeah. There's a lot of kicking talk in this house. So yeah, there's a lot of kicking talk in this house, but even my wife knows how to coach this now. But yeah, so it's real basic. You watch the videos, you learn about ProForm, you learn about the drills and so forth. You go out, you go train, you film yourself, you send me the film, I analyze it for you, and then I send you back a video with instruction. It's hard to quantify exactly how the process works with regards to the coaching part of it, because sometimes it requires a voice note, and sometimes it requires a phone call, and sometimes just a screenshot with a circle over a certain part of the body or something like that. So it's difficult to quantify that. But the program itself, once you're enrolled, it inevitably becomes quite a personal. It's a very personal thing, coaching somebody a very intense and detailed technique. You almost, it's almost impossible to teach this to someone just from a mechanical perspective. Like you have to really understand how they think about things, like how they process. So there's a lot of questions that I have to ask that the athlete has to answer. When you're standing there, what does it feel like to you? What does the ball look like? Where does it feel like the target is? When you're running with your foot in this line, what does that feel like? Oh, it feels like you're too cramped. Well, that's because you want to turn your hips. You're not too cramped. Your brain's lying to you. So there's a lot of stuff like that that's impossible to quantify. I can't explain exactly how that works. It's really based on the individual. But in a nutshell, they watch the videos, I film, analyze for them, and yeah, we just kind of go back and forth like that.
All right. People can get in touch with you on Facebook, the Rocketfoot Academy, on Instagram, just at Rocketfoot, and we'll put all the contact details in the description below, and they're welcome to contact you directly, I assume.
Yeah, anytime. Anyone can contact me directly. Yeah, just send us a message if you're interested in the program, if you want to learn some more. I do clinics. I just usually, put it on Facebook if I'm going to be in Pretoria or, Cape Town or Bloem or wherever. So just, keep track of us there. And hopefully, yeah.
Well, like I said, I'll never be a Tiger Woods, but I'm going to try to be a nice Botha now, with all I've learned. No, never. I'm too old for that. But thanks, Wihan. That was extremely interesting. I found it, I can't believe it's so complicated and it's so easy at the same time. Now, it's quite a sort of a contrast, isn't it?
It is quite a contrast. Yeah, it's something I still scratch my head at. The more you simplify, the more complex it gets. And it's different from golf because it's a little more dynamic. You're moving. There's a lot of things to consider. There's a lot of relationships at play. But that's why following the golden ratio, it does the work for you. You're programming all these relationships through that.
Right, thanks, Wihan. We appreciate that. If you have any comments, any questions, leave a comment down below, and Wihan will get